I'm going to go ahead and get to our next item. I know there are a lot of people in the audience who are waiting to comment on this issue, so we will get through that before we take a break. So I will call up, it looks like, Vice Chancellor Russell to present our next issue, item 7.1.
Thank you, President Himmelstein and members of the Board of Governors. We have a presentation today on the first presentation for regulation changes, one of 4 presentations. So the very first slide I wanted to go to was to actually just talk about the regulation process a bit, to give you a background of how that process works. And so with the mailing of the agenda package to you, started a clock ticking, a 45-day comment period for all the regulation changes. And that notice is sent out broadly across the state, not only to the Board of Governors members, but to others. Sorry. And then it moves to the first reading, which is today. Following that, the public comment period will end, and that date is set for February the 17th. Yes, February the 17th. I'm getting my dates right. At that point, the staff will take all of the comments that have been provided. The staff will formulate a response to each of those comments, and bring that back to the second reading, and provide that information to the Board of Governors. So they will have all the comments and staff's responses to those comments. We have already started collecting those. I've received many emails, pro and con, for the proposal, and we're tracking those. Legal Affairs is also keeping up with those, so that we don't lose any. So we will bring those back to you at the next Board of Governors meeting. Following the second reading, the action is taken. You can move to accept the changes. You can move to not accept the changes, or then you can also move to provide a further 15-day comment period, and delegate to the Chancellor at the end of that 15-day comment period, if all the questions have been answered, to then move forward with approval of the action. Once that's done, then the regulation actually goes into effect 30 days after that. But there's one other piece of the puzzle, is the Department of Finance also reviews these. So it's whichever date is later, either 30 days, or if the Department of Finance takes longer, we wait until they've weighed in on the issue. Once that gets resolved, then the regulation would become active. So that kind of gives you a big picture of the process, and this is not only this regulation, but the others that are coming before you today. Okay, so the next question, the question I want to answer is, why should we intervene in this issue with the prerequisites? And there are quite a few studies out there that are pointing to the many failures of our system in areas of student success. And some of these are come from external groups to the college. When you look at the literature, In Rules of the Game, Nancy Shulock and Colleen Moore state, states participating in national demonstration projects are moving to set and communicate clear and consistent standards of college readiness, assess all incoming students, and place them in appropriate classes. Their recommendation is prerequisites should be modified so that colleges can ensure that students have the necessary skills to succeed. Further, the Academic Senate has prepared several documents related to the subject. And they recognize that no other state has such a prescriptive policy for what institutions have to do or cannot do to try to improve the basic skills of underprepared students. And none has the kind of onerous statistical validation that California has. The statistical validation of prerequisites is unique. Sorry, it's moving kind of fast. The California community colleges, no other higher education faculty has thought the method of statistical validation necessary. So just to pass through the current process of establishing prerequisites and co-requisites. The first bullet says that we can establish prerequisites and co-requisites in a sequence of courses. So an example would be French 1, French 2, French 3, French 4, and that makes perfect sense. Then we can also do university courses within a discipline, university courses with prerequisites. So if the CSU has a prerequisite on a course, then we can establish the same prerequisite based on that. If there's a legal statute or regulation, and this is like for a food safety or a minimum age that has to be in place before a student can enroll in a program because of a statute, we can put that prerequisite in place. If it's a closely related lecture lab, so if there's a Chem 1 lecture class paired with a Chem 1 lab, those are closely related. You really need to take the lab if you're taking the lecture class, and so it makes sense to make that, in this case, probably a co-requisite, and put that in place without any further review other than just establishing the relationship between those two courses. And then there's statistical validation. With new courses, you have the ability to do a 2-year pilot. So you establish the prerequisite and do a 2-year pilot. That's with new courses. And then for existing courses, you have a local validation process required before establishing the prerequisite. And this is the process that seems to be bogging down the system that has been identified by the Academic Senate. And for all of these prerequisites, there is also always the ability of the student to challenge the process. If the student feels like they have other experience, that they have met the prerequisite in other ways, that each campus has a policy in place to allow students to challenge the prerequisite. So this new proposal, and it's adding a permissive option. So the first part remains intact, and that first part, not solely, but in great part, was developed as part of the process many years ago. And so we don't want to touch that. We want to leave that intact so that we don't change any agreements that we have with other agencies or institutions. But we wanted to add another permissive option, and this is content review with a plan to monitor student success and disproportionate impact. So it's not, in some cases, this has been typified in many comments by being content review alone. And so what we want to do is to kind of give you an idea of what is meant by content review with all the other things added to it. So, and one of the questions has been, what is being done to prepare for this? What sorts of things has the Chancellor's Office, Academic Senate, and others done to make this more acceptable and more positive. So the first thing is that the Academic Senate is leading the way in innovation with the Basic Skills Project, also with content review papers and professional development. There's attachment. You did receive an attachment with this. Attachment 5 talks about the case of establishing prerequisites. There's professional development. The Chancellor's Office oversees a professional development grant with the LA District. This grant is called 3CSN, and it's a staff development, professional development program that's carried out regionally throughout the state. And they focus on things like acceleration, as we saw yesterday, or other data-driven responses to help students succeed in basic skills. And then also, we have a lot of successful programs, like the one we heard yesterday, the acceleration model, UMOJA, the Academy for College of Excellence, which is the one that Diego Navarro presented some months ago. There's a new professional development program called Learning Works that's being funded by the Hewlett Foundation that is going to identify data-driven models out there that then can be replicated throughout the state. And not only will this focus on basic skills, but it'll focus on all the other courses as well. But we really are focusing on basic skills. And I will have to say, too, referring to my introduction yesterday, I do believe that by bringing Mark Wade Liu on to the staff here, it will help us really push and have some strong leadership in affecting some change with the basic skills programs that we have out there. So how does this new option work? So if a campus chooses to do this option, and here again, I want to emphasize that it is permissive, so a campus will have to have the discussion locally of whether they want to do this or not. That discussion would happen in their normal consultative process. It would have to require a policy change by their board. So there would be a discussion, open discussion that would also include a community discussion with the local board if this policy were to be changed. The districts then must prepare a plan that shows the method that they have used to identify the courses, assurance that the sufficient courses are available. So we want to make sure in their plan that they have plenty of courses offered that do not require prerequisites to allow students the option, if they don't meet the prerequisite, to still have another option, or enough options open to be able to take other courses. And obviously enough prerequisite courses to make sure that if we are requiring them to take prerequisites, that they then actually have courses to take. They also have to include in the plan provisions for training for the curriculum committee to make sure that the curriculum committee understands this process and their role in the process and how important their role is. And then research used to determine the impact. So this would up front, they have in their plan, they have to have a way to determine if there is any impact in this prerequisite being put in place. So overall, before any college can move forward with establishing prerequisites in this new way, they would have to go through this process. We feel like that this process then would assure that the campus community, the local campus community, has been involved. And the reason that I stress local is that as Chancellor Scott and Member Perez mentioned earlier, we have 112 campuses across the state. They're all different. This is a local decision that needs to be made based on their population, their numbers, their research, It's not something that we from the state want to impose upon people, that they have to do it one way or the other. This would give each campus an option to have the conversation on their own campus and to make the change if it's appropriate to them. Then also we do plan, the Chancellor's Office and the Academic Senate have in place plans to provide training for curriculum committees. We have moved to webinars as one of our major ways of providing this resource, because we can hold them multiple times, we can archive them, and people can use them when they need on demand. It's worked very well with our single course approval process that changed a few years ago. We have the Curriculum Institute in the summer. We also have field assistance by staff and others who will go out to the campuses if there are specific questions. And then obviously focusing on content review with papers and workshops at various faculty meetings and administrator meetings throughout the state. So what I want to do is to now step through that process and to give you 3 possible ways. And the next 3 slides are very small. So I provided, you do have a handout that goes along with this slide so that it's a little easier to read. The first handout shows, and these are just samples that they're kind of what ifs. How could a college, and we're focusing now on this first step of how would a college identify that a course needs to have a prerequisite established? And so this is a very straightforward and simple form, and in cooperation with the research office, faculty would get data about certain courses. And in this situation, they would check off whether a student performance in a prerequisite course on the assessment instrument correlates greater than or less than 0.35 with performance in the target audience. Now, in most cases, researchers would work with the faculty in establishing that level of data to confirm that the data are correct and to move this forward. Then this, as you see in this case, it has a sign-off from the department and the division, and also a sign-off from the research office to determine that this data has been reviewed. Another example, the second example, and this is College A with success rates by English 100, successful completion. So in the first column of numbers, you have if the student had no English 100, and then in the second column, the second column of data, if the success rate for English 100, if the student had taken English 100. So what a campus might do in this case, if they went to the curriculum committee with this data, the campus would have a discussion and look at the difference between those. Which ones of these courses have large gaps between the numbers of students who successfully took English 100 and were successful in the class, and those who did not take English 100, and see if there's a big gap between. And then they might look further at the courses where there is a large gap. Obviously, if there is no significant gap between those two, then that might not be a course that would be up for the prerequisite discussion. Okay, and moving to the third one, and this one is really small on the slide, so I hope you have the backup information. Right. And this is actually just a rank ordering. And there are actually 2 pages. There's a front and the back to this. And on this particular campus, English 97 is 2 levels below college level. So what has been done is pretty much just a rank ordering of the courses from 1 to 122 to show you course number 1 has 99% pass probability if you passed English 97, then you have a 99% possibility that you'll pass that first course. But if you look at the bottom, which is, in this case, Anthropology 101, there's a 26% chance that you'll pass, which is probably not a very good chance for students, and might be a signal that, okay, we need to look at this course. Now, in and of itself, these listings, these quick listings of data about the courses, do not determine the prerequisite, or if a prerequisite is needed. This is just to establish which courses might we look at on campus. So the next step would be is, let's take, for instance, if this were Anthropology 101, what's the next step? What would we do next now that this course we've identified, this course seems to have a high probability that you're not going to succeed unless you have English 97. So the question is, should we put a prerequisite on this course? So now I want to turn it over to Jane, who's going to take us through what the faculty would do now once the campus has decided this might be a course for us to look at.
Thank you, Vice Chancellor. Content review is something that is really pretty rigorous and requires a lot of deliberation and a lot of different people looking at it. It is not something done by one individual in one class. It is rather done by a department, and it goes through the curriculum committee with representatives from all the departments on campus. So what you see in this slide is a list of what goes on when content review takes place. And as you're glancing at that, I'd like to share with you something that is already in our local district policies about curriculum, and that is our model district policy for establishing prerequisites actually requires 7 steps, which are still going to be in place. They require the involvement of faculty with the appropriate academic expertise. You consider the course objectives in the course outline, and you look at the detailed course syllabi that are used, including the course outline of record, of course, the tests, the assignments, the expectations for the course. You look at the course format, the type of examinations, the grading criteria. It also requires that there is a specification of the body of knowledge or skills that are deemed necessary at entry for success in the course. We identify and review any other prerequisites or co-requisites that match the skills, and I'm going to show you a little bit more about that on the next slide. And ultimately, there needs to be documentation at every step along the way. So it's very rigorous, it's very collaborative, it requires faculty from many disciplines looking at the course outline and making a decision. And of course, the processes also have to go to the local board, and before that it goes to the Vice President of Instruction and the deans. And so a lot of people on campus are involved. You can go to the next one. Now this is an example. If you look at the right-hand column, it's the target course. Let's imagine that your course requires students to write a 5-page cited research paper. In order to do that research paper, they need to know how to use the library. They need to know how to format. They need to know how to do footnotes, cite sources, et cetera, et cetera. And so what you do is look at the prerequisite courses to make sure that any prerequisite course includes how to develop a research paper as a major outcome. Because if the faculty member in the target course has to also teach how to do a term paper, they are not covering the content of the course outline that they promised they would. So they have to take valuable lesson time out of the classroom to teach something that the students really needed to have before they got there. So this is just an example of 3 of them on the right and the kinds of prerequisite courses that might be matched up with it. Remember that this is very thoughtful, it's very collaborative and deliberative. We look at the course assignments, we look at the rigor of the course, and we also look at what the university is expecting the course to include, because our courses certainly count in lieu of the university courses, so we need to cover the material the same way that the universities do.
The next question that's been asked is how is the Chancellor's Office going to provide oversight of what goes on? So first of all, we focus on protecting the student. And so we look at all the processes. We want to make sure that everything is in place to make sure the student is protected. In the regulation, there's a provision that by August 1st every year, that colleges who choose this option will provide us with a list of all the prerequisites that they've established and what methodology they used, so that we can clearly identify, and we will provide that information to the Board of Governors if asked, that we can provide the numbers of prerequisites that have been established by college, so that if there's a college for some reason that has established a huge number, that might give us some cause to go look and see, okay, let's check on the process. Let's look at this further and see what's going on. So that's just one piece of data that we'll use to help determine how this is impacting the state. Also, each college will monitor progress on its student equity plan, its student equity in accordance with Section 54-20 that's already existing in regulation. So that will show the impact on student success and develop and implement a plan if there is disproportionate impact. And that already exists, and so that's already going on at the campuses. They have their student equity plans in place. The other thing that was added to this regulation since the last time you saw it was the stipulation that each 6 years all prerequisites and co-requisites established shall be reviewed, except that prerequisites and co-requisites for vocational courses or programs shall be reviewed every 2 years. So actually, this was in the previous regulations, but it is another way of establishing that every 6 years we have to, each campus has to review these. There is a stipulation in the regulation, the proposed regulation, as part of the process, that in 2 years they do have to look at the prerequisite that was done by content review only. So there is a quick turnaround for getting this in place, and then every 6 years they have to look at that, and that's been in place from the very beginning. So what if we put this in place? What happens? Obviously, as I said earlier, we are here to protect students. We are here to make sure the students succeed. And so we feel very strongly that with this new permissive option, that colleges who thoughtfully put a system in place to establish content, a prerequisite based on content review, that we will have greater student success and more students will move towards completion.
Thank you. I'll ask the pleasure of the board here. We do have a rather large number of individuals that would like to say something. Do we have board members that would like to make comment before that? Member Baca? No.
I can wait.
You can wait. Others?
I just have
Member Baum?
a clarification I'd like
Yes.
to find out
Please.
on their presentation.
Please.
Is there a method that the student can waive a prerequisite If established, and is it just through, is it, they have to petition for it?
Yes,
And-
right.
And then would that be that they would be asked to take a test or something like that, or how would that be?
No, usually in a prerequisite challenge, the student's asked to fill out a form explaining why they think they meet the prerequisite because of, they were in the Army and they had a prior course, or they had some sort of job experience that helped them get that prerequisite. And sometimes that's a verbal explanation, but they most generally have to fill out a form that goes through the process of having the faculty and the dean or vice president sign it and move forward.
Okay, so there would be an established process for a student to request.
Yes, and that actually already is in place on campuses. That
Member Bockham, then Member McDougall.
I'll try and make this brief because I know we have a number of people who'd like to speak to this. So, but I do want to ask 2 or 3 questions. First of all, I want to commend the Academic Senate Vice Chancellor Russell for doing the work on this. We have we all recognize we have a problem in terms of success and really getting our students through the system. And I understand why this is a significant issue, because it does hit, in some respects, access and success. Our greatest challenge is really this year's state budget. In particular, some of the provisions, including moving the census date later on in the semester, which seems arbitrary, and it has a whole series of implications for us, not just in terms of the funding, but in particular access to students because of the things that may drive us to do. So it may have many, many unintended consequences. But this is a significant issue, and over the next couple of months, I think we need to look at it closely and weigh those things. I think ignoring the issue of the failure of many of our students is really not an option. I mean, we have to try to deal with it in one way. I don't think that this is a solution in itself, but it may be one of the pieces in order to get at that. I do have some questions in terms of the legal issues. You mentioned that. Meldef has had some concerns on this over the past, and you've indicated that we've been going back and forth on that. The other thing that I will ask, if you could just respond to those just very briefly, is the Department of Finance and what you might expect in terms of any issues with that. And the last one, I have one other one, but I think I'll wait till after we hear from some of our speakers, is the degree of difficulty in the student challenge. So maybe we could just start with the legal.
Okay. Vice Chancellor Garcia has been meeting with MALDEF and having conversations about this and other issues. I guess I would typify the response. Oh, Jeanette here? Okay.
She'll be
So
speaking.
someone is here, possibly they'll be speaking
Okay, fine.
to that issue.
And wait.
And then Department of Finance, I don't anticipate anything from them because it is permissive language, that I don't see any mandate here that would stop it at that point, but one never knows how that works. So I don't anticipate any stop there. And then the degree of difficulty for student. And I guess a point of view is that if a college is serious enough about establishing a prerequisite, they feel very strongly that a prerequisite is needed for a course. And so having a student prove that they meet the prerequisite in another way is a process that the student needs to go through. And for some students, that's a challenge for them to understand the system and to get it through. But I think our student support services programs understand these processes and assist students with that. The counselors understand the process and can assist students with preparation of a challenge. So I think the system is in place to support students as they make a challenge, but I think the challenge is on their part to prove the point that they meet the prerequisite in another way.
Member McDougall, Member Barreras, and then Vice President Paris, and then we'll get to our public speak. Member Davis-Lyman.
Two issues. First, I'd like to add to the commendation that Board Member Baca made to the presentation. I think it was excellent, it was comprehensive, clear, and very much appreciated. 2 points of clarification. I just want to be sure I understand them. On page 4 of this handout, the proposed new system. My understanding from what you stated is that the first 4 methods, sequential course within discipline, university course with prerequisites, those 4 methods will stay in place, and they will not be changed by this. Is that accurate?
But actually, everything in the green box will stay in place.
Right.
The statistical validation remains in place unless the college chooses to do otherwise and go through the whole other process.
Okay, I
Right.
appreciate that. Second is that this methodology is not being mandated for districts to adopt, but is optional and permissive. Districts may use it if they wish to, but they are not required to use it.
That's correct.
I guess I do agree with the comments from our members, from Manuel Baca and McDougall, but my question goes back to support services. We know that these services have been deeply cut to the colleges, and so that's going to put an impact more on the colleges, giving them that flexibility. If the colleges decide to, 112 colleges adopt this content review, and then the impact that it'll put on finance department as well. So I think when we say support services, there is a deep cut in that, and that's not going to be 100% secure in order to counsel these students that are underrepresented. And I think we really need to look closely at that if we make any changes to this proposed language. So.
Could I give a short response to that? Actually, one of the original impetus factors to suggest this change came out of the action planning group for the strategic plan that the board has adopted. And in that group, they realized that right now we're giving bad information to students. We're telling them that they can take any class anytime they want, and so we're not signaling to them that actually there are some classes that you're not going to have a high likelihood of succeeding in unless you've got your basic skills out of the way. And so they actually recommended, and the board has heard that in previous presentations over the last year, they've heard that this was a recommendation to change prerequisites because what it does for students who self-counsel, who don't see a counselor for whatever reason, and cutting services is one, they will say, oh my gosh, I'd better not take anthropology my first semester. Maybe I should wait and take that next year after I've had some other classes. So actually, this is a solution to the lack of counseling.
Vice President Paris.
I'd like to ask for a point of clarification on student success. Are we qualifying that as whether or not students are passing these classes? Is that how we're defining student success, the completion rate?
I
For
think
purposes of this discussion, is that how we're defining student success, whether or not the students actually complete the class?
successful completion, right.
Okay, but we haven't did focus groups or anything to determine, I just need confirmation. Have we done focus groups with students? If we're using completion as a determinant of success, have we done focus groups to determine whether or not there's other factors that are impacting students' ability to complete the course? You know, students might be having problems with jobs. Students might be experiencing other issues in their life that impacts that. So has that been taken into consideration, or are we making an assumption that the reason they don't complete is because they're underprepared?
I would say we're not making the assumption that prerequisites will solve the completion issue. You've hit the nail on the head. There are multiple factors that lead to a student not completing a course. This is one of those factors. And so we feel like if we can plug the hole in this leaking dam, that will stop the flow at least for a few courses, and I would anticipate that on a campus that implements this, it would be a few higher level courses that are targeted to keep students from getting into those courses and not completing. This is one of the many sorts of things that need to happen. We need much better student support services to address all the other sorts of activities. We need things like acceleration. We need things like contextualized learning. We need all those other things as well. But this prerequisite piece, we hope, will stop some students from making bad choices and will also save money because students aren't attempting classes and then failing. Attempting classes and failing, at least we're putting up for some courses a signal that you need to be better, you need to be prepared at a certain level before you attempt this class.
But we have no data to support that. This is what I'm getting to. This is so critical to this discussion, is that we're making an assumption that the reason students aren't completing is because they're underprepared based on the fact that we're trying to change the prerequisites. We're making an assumption that if we change the prerequisites, that it will actually increase student success. However, we have no data to support that that is the primary factor of students' reason for not completing. Right?
Actually, the data that Vice Chancellor Russell gave you today shows that if you haven't taken the English class, your chance of failing is 75% in some cases. He showed you, I think, 2 or 3 real case examples. And last summer, I presented you with 3 different spreadsheets that showed you that there are some classes where you really don't need to have taken English or math first, and you'll do just fine. But there are a handful of courses on every campus where there is a 75–80% chance of failure. So we absolutely do have data on a campus-by-campus basis to demonstrate that a student's likelihood of passing is greatly reduced. So we
Jane,
do have
Jane,
that.
the key word there was likelihood. We don't have factual data that states that the actual reason for them not passing is because they didn't take the prerequisite. And actually last year you also showed us a graph in May that was a very great graph that shows 80% of our students are actually completing classes and 60% of them are getting through it successfully. So I don't understand how this is going to impact that already 80%, 60% rate of completion in these classes. Are we aiming for 100% completion? I mean, what is it that we're actually trying to accomplish? Because we already have high rates of completion based on the graph that you gave us last year.
You're right. The data is there's high rate and low rate. There's a long list. But let me take us back to that this is an individual choice by campus, and the data is specific to a campus. We can't really do statewide data to show how this works because every campus is different, the support services are different, the populations are different, the geography is different. All those things that you talked about, the work issues, the childcare issues are different on each campus. And so each campus has to ask those questions that you're bringing up. Are there things that are identifying that this prerequisite is going to make is a determinant factor in the completion? And I think each campus has to ask themselves that. If the campus decides, we feel like this may not be the factor, but we think it's important enough with the long list of others to make a change and to establish the prerequisite, then we feel like it's up to the campus to make that decision.
Yeah, I still don't. Okay.
Okay. Member Davis, Lyman, Member Price, and then it's time to move on.
Thank you. I, too, would like to commend the Academic Senate and the other groups who have worked so diligently on this issue and of trying to honestly get to the data, honestly look at what it is and how we can support our students so that they leave not only feeling successful, but that are successful in the courses that they attempt. Now, I just want to make sure I have these points very clear because this is truly a very important issue that you're bringing to us. This is permissive, it's local control, it's, students may enroll in other classes other than without prerequisites, as well as the one that requires a prerequisite, or the ones. Students have a right and a way to petition, and that there is some research that goes with this. Are all these steps, did I get this right?
Yes, you said it right.
Okay, thank you very much.
Member Price?
Okay, my concern is still with basic skills. With this prerequisite pretty much closing off access to these classes, I think what needs to be done before this takes place is really looking at the quality and the quantity of the basic skills classes, because, you know, where you've got here what's being done, and you have this little bullet point on basic skills, but I'd really like to see more focus on that area, because this is where a lot of our students are starting, and me being one of them, as I started in basic skills. And if you're adding on more prerequisites, it's going to take, you guys, we're talking about student success, but we're talking on prolonging that student success by this staggering of classes. So I'd really, I mean, I understand that prerequisites are necessary, but I'm just concerned that with closing off access to certain classes because students are starting off in basic skills, that I think really needs more focus.
Sometimes we need to make a change in order to spur more change. And a few years ago, the Board of Governors approved a change in the math and English graduation requirements. And the effect that that had across the state was to compel people to seriously look at their basic skills. And we developed a hugely successful basic skills initiative. I believe that this change will help to spur the dialogue that needs to take place between faculty in all disciplines, particularly with their math and English counterparts. And we absolutely can do more to strengthen what we're doing in basic skills. Nobody questions that. But we sometimes need to prod and make a change in order to encourage additional change along the way. The other thing that sometimes people get confused because they think, you might remember one of the graphs I showed you and one of the explanations I had, I think, last summer. We don't have just two courses in the college, the ones that have high prerequisites and basic skills. We have hundreds and hundreds of other courses that students are taking simultaneously. And in truth, they absolutely have to pass math and English if they're going to get a degree or transfer. And the prerequisite courses will actually be 1 or 2 levels below the requirement, most likely. Typically, I think 1 level below the transfer. And so it's really just a matter of course sequencing. It's not saying you can't take anything else and you are banished to taking nothing but basic skills, because there are hundreds of other classes that students can be enrolling in at the same time.
Okay, we're going to take a 10-minute break and return with public testimony. Please be back at 10:30.